Hi guys, Brian from Boas here. I'm a specialist and I've decided to devote my reptile keeping and breeding efforts exclusively to boa constrictors. But there's so many other types of cool reptiles out there. Today I'm going to discuss the top 5 types of reptiles I could definitely see myself working with if I didn't work with boas. If you're new to the channel, this is the place for information about all aspects of keeping and breeding boa constrictors and other reptiles. So if this video resonates with you, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe, hit the like button, and comment below if you have anything to say. It really helps me with the YouTube algorithm. First off, I want to give a shout out and express my thanks and appreciation to my good friends Lawson Hopper and Michael Beach for providing some of the beautiful still photos and video clips I used in today's video. Both of these guys are truly an asset to the herp community. If you want to check out their reptiles, I've provided a link to their homepage below in the description below this video. So one piece of advice I often have for budding reptile keepers is to specialize. So rather than trying to work with a lot of different species, it's definitely an advantage to pick one species or a few closely related species with similar care and learn all that you can about them. Really specialize in that one area, become an expert, don't try to do it all. And I think this is the best way that you can potentially make a name for yourself in reptile breeding and achieve a high level of success. Of course, for me, that species is the boa constrictor. And boa constrictors have a huge amount of positive characteristics that make them a great species to work with. And I've gone over these characteristics in many of my other videos. In thinking about other groups of reptiles that would be great to work with, I kept in mind a number of key criteria. So the animals should be beautiful to look at. They should have a whole range of interesting behaviors. They should be relatively easy to keep in captivity, although not too easy. So not something that everyone is breeding because it's so easy, but then again, something that's not going to be impossible to breed because you want to be successful in that area. The animals should also not be overly aggressive. In addition, diversity in the type of reptile you pick is key, and that's one of the things that makes boas so great is all these great localities and morphs you can work with. So ideally a reptile to work with would have lots of different morphs slash localities slash closely related species to keep things interesting. And then lastly, you want a reptile that's in demand. You don't want to produce something that there's not going to be a market for because you need to find homes for all the babies. So you want something that people really want and that there exists a lot of demand for. So with that in mind, these are the top 5 reptiles that I would work with if I didn't work with boas already. The first type of reptile on my list is a species of snake that's on almost any snake keeper's bucket list of species they must keep in their lifetime. And these are some of the largest and most impressive colubrids, the indigo snakes and cribos. So the indigo snakes and cribos constitute around 6 species of the genus Tarahumara, with the eastern Texas and Mexican indigo snakes of North America, as well as the different cribos of Central and South America, the yellowtail, blacktail, and unicolor cribo. And so these are some of the largest colubrids. They typically will get to be 6 to 8 feet as adults, with some forms reaching up to 10 feet. They're also extremely beautiful and impressive looking. They have these big heads with these huge round eyes. They also have these large shield-like scales on their heads. And they have this really nice glossy look to their bodies. They have kind of a thick body that's kind of glossy. The indigos are typically kind of a dark blue-black, often with red or white markings. The cribos are often kind of a darker gray, often with yellowish markings. The blacktail cribo is typically a yellowish brownish snake with a black tail, and the yellowtail cribo is kind of the opposite, a brownish gray snake with a yellowish tail. But they're just really beautiful, breathtaking looking animals. And another big plus of the indigos and cribos is they're said to be among the most intelligent types of reptiles that you can keep as a pet, and they often interact with their handler. A few things to keep in mind about indigo snakes and cribos is that they're one of the more active types of snakes. So they will require larger enclosures than a similarly sized boa constrictor. Another thing to keep in mind is that they have a very unusual diet. In addition to eating rodents, they'll also eat birds, amphibians, small reptiles, and even fish. And you know, another noteworthy thing is that most keepers will feed them at least every week, sometimes several times a week. And because of this, they have faster digestive systems, and they're said to poop an awful lot. And they're one of the smellier reptiles. So if you're going to go for an Indigo or Cribo, you want to make sure you have the time to maintain the animal, because you're going to have to clean the cage out several times a week. And if I was going to pick up one of these impressive dry marcan, probably my top choices would be the Texas indigo snake and the Blacktail Cribo. The eastern indigo is a very beautiful and impressive species, but it has the disadvantage of you need to have a Fish and Wildlife permit in order to move one across state lines. In addition, unfortunately, the eastern indigo gene pool in captivity is quite small, so there's some issues with inbreeding, which is why I would stem for the Texas indigo. The Blacktail Cribo is one of the most impressive members of the genus, with this nice yellowish body with black markings and then a dark tail. And these guys are said to attain occasionally lengths of up to 10 feet. So very impressive animals, as are all of the members of the genus Drymarchon. The next reptile on my list is a type of python that's similar in many ways to boa constrictors, and that is the carpet python, Morelia spilota. And so these animals, in terms of size, are somewhat similar to boa constrictors, with most adults being in the 6 to 12 foot range. Occasionally they'll get to be a little bigger than that. But what's really cool about these animals, which hail from Australia, New Guinea, and surrounding islands, is that there's 5 different subspecies of Morelia spilota and lots of locality-specific variants. So the diamond python, which is the nominate form, is one of the rarer types, which is characterized by this beautiful speckled pattern. You know, the jungle carpet python is another really beautiful subspecies, which has these velvety dark black bands with this beautiful golden color. And these have been selectively bred by breeders like Dave and Tracy Barker from VPI and my buddy Michael Beach from Woodcliff Herps for this beautiful golden color. There's also a closely related species known as the Centralian python, which was once considered a subspecies of carpet python. It was recently reclassified as a separate species, Morelia bredlii. But these beautiful animals, which come from the interior desert regions of Australia, have this beautiful sandy brown color. Really breathtaking to look at. And if I was going to go for a carpet python, probably my 2 biggest choices would be, of course, the jungle carpet and the Centralian python. The general husbandry of carpet pythons is fairly similar to that of boa constrictors, except since they tend to be more arboreal than boas, they need larger cage or higher cages with more climbing opportunities. And of course, being pythons, they also lay eggs. So of course, the reproductive husbandry is a little bit different. And the last thing that carpet pythons have going for them is that there are quite a few different morphs, including albinos, axanthics, hypos, caramel albinos, jaguars, and zebras. So if you're into the morph thing, there's a lot of variety for you in the carpet pythons as well. And this is why, if I was going to work with a species of python, carpet pythons would definitely be at the top of my list. Moving away from snakes, the next group on my list of really cool reptiles to work with are tortoises. And I've always really liked tortoises. Even as a kid, I thought they were the coolest looking animals, almost like little armored dinosaurs, like little ankylosaurs. Unfortunately, at the time, they were nearly impossible to find, you know, where I lived in the Northeast. And it was not until my early 20s that I finally got to keep tortoises, and I did keep some leopard and sulcata tortoises for a while. I thought they were really cool. Unfortunately, they take up a lot of space and you really need outdoor space, so eventually I had to sell them and, you know, move on to just keeping snakes. But if I was going to get back into tortoise keeping, the one species that is at the top of my list is the red-footed tortoise, Chelonitis carbonaria. And so what I like about these animals is that they're kind of medium in size, with most adults being about a foot or so in length. And they have a lot of diversity. So although they're all classified as one species with no recognized subspecies, there are at least 5 distinct clades which have been described occurring throughout most of South America. So there's a lot of diversity, and these clades may eventually be recognized as subspecies or even full species. The most commonly type of redfoot seen in the pet trade is from the northeastern clade in the Guiana Shield region of South America. Then we have the northern clade from Colombia and Venezuela, and the northwestern clade from Panama and Colombia. Moving south and east, we have what's known as the eastern clade, which come from eastern Brazil, and these are affectionately known as cherry-head red-footed tortoises, and they're some of the most appealing to me. So this type is a little bit smaller on average, getting up to around 9 to 10 inches in adult length, and they have this beautiful coloration with these bright red colored heads and lots of red markings on their legs. They also will often have this marbled shell appearance where they have this beautiful ivory markings and stripes on a nice dark blackish looking shell. They're just absolutely breathtaking to look at, and if I was going to go for a tortoise, that would be definitely my #1 pick. And then lastly, we have the southern clade of red-footed tortoises from Paraguay, southern Brazil, and Bolivia. And these animals are noteworthy in that they get larger on average than the other forms and can sometimes get to be up to 20 and maybe even about 2 feet in length. Quite rarely. So a lot of diversity and different types of animals within the species of red-footed tortoise. Red-footed tortoises are really personable in nature and will often interact with their keepers. They are primarily herbivorous, of course, being tortoises, but they do eat some animal material in their diet. And being a tortoise, they're very long-lived and can sometimes live to be 50 years or even more. So it's a long-term commitment if you go for a red-footed tortoise. One last thing to consider, as with any tortoise, they really need to be outside at least for part of the year to do well, because they really need exposure to full spectrum light from the sun. And you can get full spectrum bulbs for indoors, but they're really no substitute for the the real natural sunlight. The next group on my list of really cool reptiles to work with is kind of a broader group, and that's the locality-specific colubrid snakes. And I've always loved colubrids. I actually started off working with colubrids before I got into boas and kept different rat snakes and milk snakes. As far as the family Colubridae, it's the largest snake family with lots and lots of species. So I would just narrow it down to the more commonly kept species occurring in the United States, including the corn and rat snakes, the king and milk snakes, and the pine and gopher snakes. Within these few species, there are a lot of really interesting and very impressive animals to work with. So one thing that's cool about keeping colubrids is that unlike boa constrictors, if you live in the United States, it might even be possible to establish your own locality and your own specific bloodline. So if you have the right permits, there are areas where you can legally collect, founder animals to start a breeding project. And I know taking an animal from the wild is definitely a controversial topic, and most people should definitely not try to take animals out of the wild. If you really want to establish your own bloodline specific to a locality, this is really the best way to go about it. Of course, in the United States, we don't have any native boa constrictors, so it would be impossible to start a locality of boa constrictor based on collecting a U.S. wild animal. I suppose you could collect rosy boas or rubber boas, but those aren't, truly boa constrictors in the boa family. And many places do have laws against this. So if you're going to collect anything, make sure you follow all of the appropriate laws and have all the necessary permits. And of course, most people shouldn't even be thinking about collecting animals from the wild. So if I was going to get into specific types of locality colubrids, I've always been attracted to corn snakes. I had a corn snake as a kid, one of my first reptiles. I really like the Okatee from South Carolina with the beautiful reds and oranges, as well as the Miami phase from South Florida with its beautiful maroonish saddles on kind of a charcoal gray background. There are quite a few locality-specific California kingsnakes being worked with in captivity that vary. Some of them have this really deep jet black color with bands of pure white, like the phases from the desert areas of Southern California. Others have stripes. Other types have kind of more of a dark chocolatey brown or even lavender instead of the black, with kind of more of a creamy yellow bands or stripes. So a lot of diversity within the species of California kingsnake. And then probably my all-time favorite are the mountain kingsnakes from California, Arizona, and Mexico. And there's a huge amount of diversity in these groups of animals. Several different species, numerous subspecies, lots of different beautiful, brightly colored animals with red, yellow, and black coloration. And then finally I have to mention the gray-banded kingsnakes. Beautiful, bright red color on a gray background. Some of them, the red is replaced by more of a darker maroonish brownish color. A lot of locality specific kingsnakes are being actively worked with in captivity. And of course, there's no way I could ever keep all these animals. This is kind of more of my Christmas list of all the reptiles I could keep if I had 10 lifetimes. The last group of cool reptiles to work with on my list are a departure in that they're a lizard, and also they're different in that these are more specialized and a little more difficult to keep than the other types of animals I've been discussing. These are definitely not for beginners, and that's the chameleons. And chameleons have always been fascinating to me. As a kid, I just thought they were the coolest looking animals ever, with their prehensile tails, their independently focusing eyes, their beautiful colors, which are constantly changing, as well as their long sticky tongues. And many of them have this really cool head ornamentation, which makes them look like little dinosaurs. And I just thought that was so cool as a kid, and I continue to think it's cool as an adult. So chameleons have been a challenge in the past to keep, but over the last few decades there have been a lot of advancements in keeping and breeding chameleons in captivity, and successful chameleon keeping is now a lot more common than it used to be. Chameleons need more specialized enclosures. They need moderate temperatures, typically in the range of 70 to 80 degrees with a warmer hot spot. If they're kept too hot, it's not good for them. They also need a lot of air. They need a lot of ventilation. They don't do well in enclosed spaces. And they need the right light, the full spectrum light from the sun. So the best way to keep chameleons is to keep them outdoors for at least part of the time. And I'm really lucky where I live in Northern California is ideal climate for keeping chameleons outside. So basically you need to set up screened enclosures that give each animal a lot of space, and you need a lot of plants for them to climb on. The humidity has to be kept moderate to high depending on the species. But it's, again, really important that they're outside getting the fresh air and getting the sunshine. And in these conditions, they are most likely to breed successfully and to thrive in general. Chameleons are also different from the other reptiles on my list because they're insect eaters. And I've kept lizards that eat insects before in the past, and I think it definitely has a lot of disadvantages. But if you're specializing in an insect-eating animal, there are steps you can take to assure a constant supply of feeder insects, either ordering them from supply houses or growing your own. And if you were specializing just on chameleons, it probably wouldn't really be that big of a deal. So if I was going to keep a chameleon, there are a few common species that I probably would be most likely to start with. There's also some more exotic looking species that you don't see as often. But, even the more common ones are plenty exotic enough for me. And probably the top choice would be the Jackson's chameleon of East Africa. I've always thought these were super cool with their 3 horns, looking almost like a little Triceratops dinosaur. Another pick high on my list would be the veiled chameleon from Yemen and Saudi Arabia. And these are another animal that looks just like a dinosaur with this big casque formation on the top of its head. Really cool to look at. Veiled chameleons also have really beautiful colors to look at, and they get to be a little bigger than the Jackson's chameleons, reaching about 1.5 feet or so, whereas the Jacksons get to be about 1 foot or so in length. Another really colorful species is the Panther Chameleon of Madagascar, and these animals can have really amazing colors. They don't have the same types of really cool head ornamentation as the veiled or the Jacksons, but they make up for it with the beautiful color. And lastly, there's the flapneck chameleon of Southern Africa. And so this is a slightly smaller species. It's not quite as impressive looking as its other three species, but it's beautiful in its own right, and it's said to be one of the hardiest and easy to keep in captivity. So the flap-neck chameleon would certainly be a good place to start if you're interested in keeping a chameleon as a pet. And so the chameleons are the last on my list of 5 really cool reptiles to work with. I really wish I had the time and energy and space to work with all these different types. I think you probably would need several lifetimes in order to do everything. I'm happy with the boas. I'm happy that I've picked a species that gives me a lot of satisfaction. I could definitely see myself picking up maybe one animal or a pair of some of the types of reptiles I just talked about, just to add some variety and give me a little bit of something other than boas to devote my time to. But I certainly would not have the time or energy to expand as much as I have in these other species as I do with the boa constrictors. So those are my top 5 reptiles other than boas that would be really cool to work with. I'm just curious to see if any of these types of reptiles resonate with you. If so, comment below if I mentioned a type of reptile you've always dreamed of working with. Or if you have a dream type of reptile that I didn't mention, please share it with the group. Comment below on what your dream reptile is that you've always wanted to work with, and that hopefully you will someday. So I hope this video was helpful. As always, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me. Thanks for watching, and enjoy your reptiles.